When I was growing up in the UK, I watched a lot of cowboy movies, as did millions of people around the world. It wasn't just Americans. In fact, I still watch cowboy movies. And in most cowboy movies, there's a sheriff, and most of the time he's a good guy. Not just a good guy, but the best guy in a world gone bad. Like Gary Cooper as Marshall Kane in High Noon, courageous in the face of almost certain death. Or Burt Lancaster as Wyatt Earp in the gunfight at the OK Corral. In fact, even through the tumultuous 1960s, this is what a sheriff looked like to most Americans. Andy Griffith, the conciliatory, oh shucks father figure who always knows best. But these days, as they say, there's a new sheriff in town.
And I've got a newsflash for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Your policies suck.
The woke culture wants to make you feel like you can't go out and do your job.
The first step to communism is to take your religion.
We do not mandate the vaccine, and as long as I'm your sheriff, we will never mandate the vaccine.
The Constitution's hanging by a thread.
We're going to find how many people love freedom enough to die for it.
Monkeypox, same thing. They know where it's coming from. They just don't want to offend that small group of people.
This administration is undermining the rule of law. They are aiding and abetting the cartels.
I can see that you guys love the rule of law and law enforcement, and we appreciate that. Do you know who else loved the rule of law and who loves the rule of law? Donald Trump.
Hold on. Donald Trump riled up a mob to attack police at the Capitol. He is attacking the FBI almost every day after the search warrant at his Florida home. He's the guy who just loves the rule of law. He is. That charmer singing Trump's praises there is Sheriff Mark Lamb of Pinal County, Arizona, home to 500,000 people between Phoenix and Tucson. Forget Mayberry, that is supposedly what a real American sheriff looks like today. And that's not according to me, that's according to Lamb in his self-published 2020 book titled American Sheriff. Of course. He explains that the job of an American sheriff, as he sees it, is to stand for traditional values against the woke mob. And today Lamb has become the poster boy for a new and deeply insidious effort by some hard-right, conspiracy-mongering law enforcement officials to get involved in our elections. As Bolts magazine put it, far-right sheriffs around the country are partnering with leading purveyors of election fraud conspiracies, part of an escalating campaign to police the vote. Look, we have told you plenty on this show about Donald Trump and Fox and Newsmax and Oath Keepers and the Republican election officials all pushing the big lie. We haven't talked about the dangerous and increasingly pivotal role that sheriffs are playing in threatening free and fair elections in this country. But we need to. And first we have to talk about Mark Lamb, who also formed a civilian posse during the Black Lives Matter demonstrations in the summer of 2020, and who recently told reporter Jessica Pishko in Politico that the January 6th insurrectionists were, quote, very loving Christian people who just happened to support President Trump a lot. Because you see, Mark Lamb has big plans for future elections, plans he discussed at an Arizona Trump rally in July, where he shared a stage with pillow salesman and big lie pitchman Mike Lindell.
I just teamed up with True the Vote. Do you guys know who True the Vote is? We are going to make sure that we have election integrity this year. We will not let happen what happened in 2020.
Now, despite those movies I grew up on, dangerous far-right sheriffs are nothing new in America. From former Sheriff Joe Arpaio of Maricopa County, notorious for mistreating detainees and pardoned by Trump after defying a judge's order to stop racial profiling, all next door to Mark Lamb's jurisdiction. And there's Fox's favorite former Milwaukee Sheriff David Clarke, who resigned amid allegations of prisoner abuse, who was once touted for a Homeland Security job by Donald Trump, and now shows up on Newsmax with Sheriff Lamb. These guys do matter, because as much as we on TV focus on politicians in Washington and a handful of state capitals, sheriffs wield immense power in their communities. Many now call themselves constitutional sheriffs. They say that as law enforcement, they can choose not to enforce laws they think are unconstitutional, from gun regulations to election codes. They even have their own group, the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association, founded in 2011 by another Arizona sheriff, Richard Mack, who has said that roughly 10% of the country's 3,000 sheriffs are members. When he founded the group, Mack also happened to be on the board of the Oath Keepers militia. You remember them, the group of military and law enforcement veterans who vowed not to obey orders from a tyrannical president, meaning Barack Obama, and some of whose members are on trial for their role in the assault on the Capitol on January the 6th on behalf of Donald Trump. 3 have pleaded guilty already to seditious conspiracy. But as you heard Lamb say earlier, his group of sheriffs, called Protect America Now, and the other constitutional sheriffs group, have taken their effort to the next level by partnering with a group called True the Vote, the pro-Trump organization that makes up election fraud allegations and benefits off of donations from a credulous GOP base. What could that partnership entail? Well, Lamb has already extended his services to Pinal County residents.
We'll also be offering our services to help look at the voter rolls. We're committed to making sure that we will secure those ballot boxes. We will be watching the videos to make sure that nobody is breaking the laws. Pro-Trump, armed cops policing precincts, ballot boxes, watching surveillance videos, breathing down election officials' necks. What could go wrong? The New York Times points out that at least 3 sheriffs in Michigan, Kansas, and Wisconsin have already been carrying out their own investigations, clashing with election officials who warn that they are overstepping their authority and meddling in an area where they have little expertise. They say they're for the Constitution. They say they're nonpartisan. But many continue to argue that Trump won in 2020. And many more say out loud, as Lamb does, that Biden is a nightmare and Trump is a hero. They seem to be keeping to the pledge that one sheriff made to then-President Trump at the White House in 2018.
You said you have our back, and the sheriffs across this nation have yours. And God bless you, and thank you, Mr. President.
Donald Trump has been out of office for more than a year and a half. He's wrapped up in a federal criminal investigation, and yet today, an estimated 1 in 10 of America's sheriffs, maybe more, armed men with jurisdiction over millions of Americans, are clearly signaling that when it comes to the vote in 2024, they still have his back. And Jessica Pishko, that reporter whose work on Mark Lamb I mentioned earlier, joins me now. She's an independent journalist working on a book about sheriffs and democracy. Jessica, thanks so much for coming on the show. When you are evaluating the threats to American democracy and free and fair elections right now, how big a threat are some of these far-right sheriffs in your view?
I think the deepest thing to be concerned about sheriffs is because of the increasing size of the police state, the amount of money, equipment, firepower that sheriffs have, and the lack of oversight means that sheriffs can do quite a lot to terrorize, to frighten people, to create a lot of chaos in their community, even if on the national level, as you rightly point out, they are not important figures on the national level. On the local level, especially day to day, if you're a voter, if you're a hesitant voter, if you're a person of color or an immigrant, they have a deep and profound impact on your life.
And Jessica, explain this idea in more detail of the constitutional sheriff. What is the basis even for such a concept?
Well, the constitutional sheriff movement comes from a long line of various anti-government movements. Its roots lay in a movement called the Posse Comitatus movement, which was popular in the 60s. And that movement really argued that the federal government should not be able to tell local counties and cities what to do. It was formed by an avowed white supremacist who was upset about school desegregation. One of the tenets that they put forward was the fact that sheriffs should be able to stop federal law enforcement from coming into counties. And so this makes a lot of sense when you think about school desegregation, and the federal government had to send the National Guard to force schools to desegregate. From that movement came a lot of other movements that we see today. So, for example, the militia movement, of which Timothy McVeigh is among the more famous members, the white supremacy movement, various sovereign citizen movements, and tax evaders. So they sort of, from this mass, they sprinkled forth a lot of anti-government movements, and the constitutional sheriff movement was one of those movements that stemmed from that. They got sort of a Oh, sorry.
No, I was going to say, when we talk about sheriffs more broadly, just to kind of some basics, who do they answer to? Just the voters? At what point can or should the feds or state officials step in?
That's a really good question. So sheriffs are county officials elected by the voters on the county level in almost every single state. They're created by state constitutions, so not the federal constitution, to be clear. It gets confusing because constitutional sheriff sounds like the federal constitution has something to do with it. And so they can be controlled somewhat on the local level by voters, somewhat on the state level. So every state does have laws that tell sheriffs and their deputies what they can and can't do. Like most policing on the federal level, it's pretty limited. Largely the way the federal level in some amount has any input with sheriff, it's through money. So financial disbursements like Biden's new plan.
And just to give viewers a practical sense of what this election policing by sheriffs means, here's Sheriff Lamb on an Election Deniers podcast in July, giving some curious advice to voters. Have a listen.
If, let's say, somebody is at their polling booth and they see something untoward, they see something that they know goes against the regulations or the local laws, the best person to call is the sheriff, not, let's say, the local election official. Is that the case?
That would be ideal.
Jessica, how bad is that advice? If you see something at the polls, take it straight to the sheriff?
Well, I think that it is very much in line with what sheriffs and law enforcement feel their job is, which is to sort of sort through this idea of a snitch or vigilante culture. You know, you mentioned Lamb's posse before, which is a group of civilians, right, endowed with some power to do a certain amount of policing. And so that line between something like a vigilante or a civilian militia, right, who are not they're not official law enforcement. And then this idea of reporting to the sheriff, because the sheriff, for some reason, is seen as more likely to heed or understand the concerns of regular people. In this case, regular people, meaning a certain very specific type of people, I think is a very interesting and provocative idea. I think the most interesting thing there is, you know, when they suggest that people ought to call their sheriff, I don't think they mean every single person. I think they mean a particular type of people, meaning largely white, right-leaning people, right?
Yeah, it's not going to be black people calling the sheriff to deal with white people, let's be honest. Earlier, you heard a sheriff at the White House express his admiration for Donald Trump. Talk about the connections between Trump world and these sheriffs. Trump world is leaning into these groups of armed men, is it not?
Yes. So Donald Trump has invited sheriffs to the White House more than any other president before him. So it's pretty atypical for a president to be at all concerned with county sheriffs as a first matter. That particular meeting in 2018 was unprecedented, was more sheriffs than before. And they gave him, I think, a little plaque that made him an honorary sheriff. You know, he has, I think, a deep interest in sheriffs, both because of the idea of their connection to this sort of toxic masculinity, as well as a perceived connection to American culture. I think that it's an interesting connection that Trump made, and I think that MAGA world has hooked onto this as a way to perpetuate their idea through the local level. The next thing that's going on now is that the people who want school books banned are now also connecting with their local sheriff, right? So they're being encouraged to call their sheriff about school library books, which seems also particularly odd.
I was just going to say, we're almost out of time, but I have to ask, just broadening it out before we go. Just this weekend, the U.S. Border Patrol says it's investigating after one of its regional Twitter accounts was sharing tweets critical of Joe Biden's immigration policy, liking derogatory comments about Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, retweeting Stephen Miller. What do incidents like that tell you about the state of our law enforcement right now and the politicization of law enforcement on the right?
I think we need to be really concerned about the fact that the right and law enforcement particularly are being recruited to be a part of this far-right anti-government movement. Sheriffs have always been the leaders in this particular area, and there are many indicators that they are moving further to the right and becoming more extreme.